The NHL has made the preseason worthless. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, what you might be able to take away from games that don't really count.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. And on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk about the preseason in the NHL in a philosophical way. We will start out with why the preseason matters less than ever. Our second segment, we'll talk about some of the functions the Oilers might be able to take away from the preseason. And then we will tie a bow on this episode by talking about what's the best case scenario for someone to have a good preseason. So to start out, the NHL, the way things are now, and this is not unique to the NHL. This is a problem in football. This is a problem in basketball. Lesser extent in baseball, but that's because spring training is a little bit longer and it has more of a function for ramping up, especially of pitchers, because that's such a unique skill set and it's so physically taxing on the body. You need to manage those guys in a very specific way, and they really do need 6 to 8 weeks of ramp up before they start a season. But by and large, it is very challenging to incentivize players, especially in the contact sports, football and hockey, to put forward their best effort in these environments. These games do not count. They do not matter. That is why you have largely seen the best players in these sports, the NFL and the NHL, abstain almost entirely in most cases from participating, or in the cases of guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, they'll play a few of these games. They will not play all of them because the risk-reward proposition for one of those players in this environment is out of whack. In a given regular season game, there is always a chance to get hurt, but there is an understanding, an implied understanding that this is the regular season. Because these games count, I need to try. I need to play with an absence of fear. And it is challenging to play without an absence of fear or be able to overcome that fear if the stakes are not particularly real. And I frame it that way because for someone like Connor McDavid, for someone like Leon Draisaitl, the opportunity to play in a simulated game environment is helpful. Getting yourself up to game speed, which is different from practice speed, is a real phenomena. Guys can skate all they want on their own. They can participate in drills in practice. They can even participate in organized skates in practice. You do game situations. That is not the same as being out there against a team in another jersey. That is okay with if you get hurt. There is an implied understanding in practice that we're not out there to hurt our own guys. Yeah, we throw hits. That's why we have contact and non-contact jerseys. But there is an implied understanding that I'm going to play this above board more than I need to because these are my guys. The minute you go out there against a team in another jersey, the stakes are different. And in the preseason, which I have likened to a bit of a circus environment where you have guys at all different walks or phases of their respective NHL careers. For the most part, teams are running A, B, and some teams are even running C teams, at least in the early stages, to get a full rotation of guys through the preseason. They want to see all three of their goalies. They want to see 10 to 12 defensemen. They want to see 20 to 30 forwards. And having an A, B, and C team allows you to give 1 or 2 stars, 1 or 2 veterans, 1 or 2 fringe guys, a couple AHL guys, and then a couple prospects to teams A, B, and C. The star players, the established veterans, the preseason for them is effectively more intense exercise. It is working out with more intensity. And there is value in that. Again, I said it before and I'll reiterate it again. There is value in playing in a game environment that is fundamentally different from practice. But the guys who are going to take these games seriously, and the best metaphor I can give you is that if you were in high school gym class, physical education, you definitely had those guys, and I can say this because I was one of those guys, who took the stakes a little too seriously. The guys who wanted to win, who were abrasive, who were yelling, who were hooting and hollering, trying to get people to buy in, trying to get people to care, the gym class heroes of the world. Those types of guys are out here in the preseason. Those are the guys who are out there desperately trying to get on the radar. Those are the guys who the preseason matters. Those are the guys who are trying to get noticed. Those are the guys who are playing like their hair is on fire because they will do anything to have their coach or their general manager see them. And there are levels to this, and we'll talk about it more in our second and third segments, so I don't want to step too far ahead. But you have to understand that for guys who are going to be in the AHL, who are going to be in Bakersfield this year, this audition is effectively their way of getting Chris Knobloch or Stan Bowman to say, okay, if we need someone for 3 games in February because we have an injury, we can pick that guy. We can call him up. He will not embarrass us. He was out there trying when no one else was. That is a good indicator of moral character. And again, I don't want to equate work with morals. I think that's where you start to lose me in some degree. Yeah, there should be dignity in work. You shouldn't feel ashamed to do what you do for a living. For some guys, riding the bus in the AHL is as good as it's going to get hockey-wise, and there's no shame in that. That is an important skill. That is an important role. That is the league where the developmental guys figure it out for the bottom 6 in the NHL. There are young guys who just physically aren't mature enough for the NHL. They need to be in the AHL. And for the preseason, this is a chance for your AHL guys to say, okay, I deserve a call up here. And I know I don't really have a future with this team, but if I play well enough in the preseason, I do something to get noticed, that is enough to get a call up. And if I can get a call up, okay, I get some more NHL games. And if I look okay in those NHL games, next summer, if I'm up for a new contract, I can either point to the team and say, hey, I don't mind being the AHL veteran, but you guys call on me when you need me, and a raise would be nice. Or if you're looking for a role to maybe get a chance to play in the NHL more consistently, you can point to your cups of coffee and say, Edmonton trusted me. I made this point last year, midway through November, maybe December, after Kasperi Kapanen had been in the lineup for a few weeks. And look, Kapanen is going to make the NHL roster. It would be a genuine shock if he didn't. But at the time, if you'll recall, he was claimed off of waivers. The Oilers were missing a couple forwards because of injuries, and they literally needed anybody with a pulse. And what I had said about Kapanen was, if this goes well for him, if he plays reasonably well for the rest of the regular season, even if he doesn't have a role in the playoffs, of course, he scored the overtime game winner against Vegas. That was an important one. Even if he didn't have a role in the postseason, him playing 40 or 50 regular season games for a team that fancied itself a Stanley Cup contender like the Oilers, that was important. That was a sign that this guy was trustworthy enough to be on a good team. And if he's trustworthy enough to be on the Oilers, he could have signed with a lesser quality, a lower quality team and tried to get himself a bigger role. But that's an example of the opportunities that are out there waiting to be seized. And of course, that was in season, not preseason, but it's the same type of mindset you want to bring. So we're going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what the practical application of preseason is, especially for teams like the Oilers that do think they're Stanley Cup contenders. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however you like to play. If you want to player props, if you want to build the same game parlay for a squad wide with your friends, or if you feel the vibe changing in a game, you know, like that Chiefs game last night, you can get in with live betting. The game on Thursday is not great. The Seahawks and Cardinals, two teams who have played reasonably well so far. The Cardinals, a modest 1.5 point home favorite. Sneaky good game in the NFC Sunday afternoon. Eagles at the Buccaneers. The Eagles 3.5 point road favorites. Dare I say the Buccaneers might win that game. And of course, Jackson Dart's NFL debut as a starter against the Chargers. All of that and so much more. So FanDuel has one question. Are you ready? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting fanduel.com to get started. That's fanduel.com to place your first $5 bet. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are inching closer to the start of the regular season. And candidly, I treat the preseason with an air of skepticism. I've made no bones about that. I don't find it particularly important. I don't find it particularly interesting. As a team like the Oilers that maybe has 2-3 roster spots up for grabs in the whole lineup, there's not a lot here. If you're a team like, say, the Sharks, the Penguins, the Islanders, where you have young guys who, if they have good camps, could play their way onto the roster, that's interesting because young guys trying to prove themselves have a fundamentally different tenor from the AHL guys I've been talking about mostly, the types of guys who are going to have a fight, who are going to throw a big hit because they want to get noticed. And yes, it is the performative male behavior of the moment. Instead of matcha and labubus, it is staged fights against other AHLers, just so you both get on the stat sheet, just so you both get in the highlight reels for being in a fight. But the practical application and the point of the preseason, at least at one time, was to learn about your team. It was to get ideas as to who would play with who. It was to get ideas about functionality. If you wanted to try moving a center to wing, if you wanted to maybe switch a winger to the opposite wing, if you wanted to change your power play alignment, if you wanted to maybe move someone who had been a bumper into the center lane and be more of a shoot first guy, if you want to try a different quarterback, if you maybe changed your number one defenseman, or if you acquired someone new, those are value use cases with actual applicable value for teams. Unfortunately, because nobody takes these seriously anymore, there is very little experimentation. There is very little chemistry adjusting. And for me, I would love to see, who's Ty Emberson playing with? Is he playing with Brett Kulak? Is he playing with Darnell Nurse? Is he playing with somebody who isn't one of the three guys we expect to be on the left, like Kulak, Ekholm, or Nurse? Because if he's not one of those three guys, that doesn't bode particularly well for his trajectory. Because if he's playing with an AHLer, that tells you where he is in the pecking order. And I mentioned Emberson because that's one of the few real head-to-head competitions here. Emberson and Stetcher are playing for the same role. They both would like a chance to be the team's number 6 defenseman. I think it would far better situate Emberson as an everydayer as opposed to a 7th D. I think at that age, with as little NHL experience he has, especially at that age, he needs to be playing. And we have that old adage, would you rather play the old guy who is bad or the young guy who might be bad? And look, I don't think Troy Stetcher's bad. I think Troy Stetcher is pretty reliable as far as 6th defensemen go. And I think if he's your organization's 7th defenseman, I think you actually have a pretty good team, especially at least on your back end, because Troy Stetcher's an NHL defenseman. Does he have some concerns of being a little undersized, not being the most physically imposing? Yes, of course. Of course, you would like to have well-rounded guys, but we're talking about depth here. We're not talking about 1 or 2. We're talking about 6 or 7. So keep an eye on who Ty Emberson plays with. If he's playing with Darnell Nurse a lot, that would lead me to believe he's got a good chance to make the team, because that leads me to believe that they think that could be a pair. And if Ekholm and Bouchard are together, Nurse and Emberson, okay, we've started to organize here. And then we're going to put Jake Wallman in a really specialized role. I think Jake Wallman is probably going to end up playing on the second pair on his offside with Nurse. But if at the very least, you could talk me into a world where Wallman is effectively a luxury piece, that he is only getting out there in extremely offensively advantageous situations, and we want to really specialize him. We want to refine his workload so that we are optimizing what he is good at. I don't think that's what I would do, but I do think there's an argument for that. And if that's the case, well, that means Ty Emberson's got to be on that second pair, because if Emberson's playing with Nurse instead of Stetcher and Jake Wallman's on the third pair with Kulak, that tells you something. That tells you what the pecking order looks like. The other component to this, and the other real useful test case for preseason, is who the young guys play with. Because as much as we all want Ike Howard and Matthew Savoie to play well, we all want them to deliver, there is no guarantee that either guy will spend the entire season in the NHL. I think there's a world where Ike Howard spends a good chunk of 2025 and 2026 in the AHL because he needs to physically mature. I think there's a reasonable argument Matthew Savoie could spend stretches of time in the AHL as well, depending on how things go. I think who each guy plays with at the NHL level in these preseason games, if they get a chance to play with Leon or Connor, if they get to play with Nuge, whoever you play with as an unproven guy, that tells me a lot about what your team thinks of you. Because if Howard's out there with Adam Henrique and Trent Frederick, okay, that's telling me they're not particularly prioritizing him. They're not really interested in seeing what he can do with high-end talent. They're more concerned with, can he just keep up with the speed of the game? And again, I don't know what the best course of action is. Developing talent is not linear. There is no one-size-fits-all guidebook. There are some general best practices. You want to give guys ice time. You want to give them special teams time. But beyond that, there isn't one set way to do this. If the Oilers want to slow play Howard or Savoie or both, they could start in the bottom six and work their way up as they get comfortable. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that's what I would do, but I can understand that. There is an argument to be made that that could make sense. The last point and the last part I want to make here, what do the special teams units look like? Because there's a lot more room for variance. The Oilers changed quite a bit of their coaching staff under Chris Knoblauch, new penalty kill, new power play, and with new structure comes growing pains. And that's not to say either unit is going to be bad or it's going to regress. Guys take a little while to get going. You think about what the special teams were the first month of the season last year, where the Oilers could not score a goal 5-on-4, and they couldn't kill a penalty to save their life. There was a stretch there where the Oilers were a 40% penalty kill in October of last year. So it is important that the guys start to get a feel for playing with each other. And again, this is one of the conundrums with the preseason being so devalued, is you probably won't even have your actual penalty killers playing with each other close to game one. And if you go the entire preseason without those guys at least getting a baseline feel for each other, that's a cause for concern. You're testing something that's unproven in actual games. When you had preseason games whose entire purpose is for testing, is for trials, is for proving grounds. But we're going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll talk about the best case scenario for preseason right after this. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances or the thought makes you anxious, Monarch is here for you. Monarch does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money. And Monarch promises you will never, ever touch a spreadsheet. Monarch definitely clocked I was not saving enough for any of my long-term goals, whether that was retirement or a big purchase. And with Monarch, I've been able to put together savings plans for purchases like headphones or towards my retirement so I can hit actual tangible goals. Do not let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. One more time, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. With that drumbeat of the preseason, we see the looming regular season on the horizon, and the best case scenario for your regular season is very straightforward. No injuries. That is the biggest goal if you are a manager, a general manager, if you are a coach, if you are an assistant coach, if you are an active player. You want to get through the preseason unscathed. You don't want to be the person who gets dinged up in September by some guy who's going to be riding the bus in the A. And that's going to be the highlight of his year. But because you have a nagging knee discomfort, you can't skate the way you need to in April. And the season is long. We know this. I would dare to say 82 games might be too long for the nature of hockey. But you have to answer the bell for what is in front of you. And I talk about it a lot, especially as we get into March and April. Your journey to winning a Stanley Cup the last week of June, it started already. If the team that is going to win the Stanley Cup has taken their first steps to get there this year, they have had their training camp activities. They may or may not have played a preseason game yet. You are making the steps now that you're going to need to get where you want to go. And there is no one-size-fits-all way of doing this. But when you are a player, the preseason is about getting your feet under you, avoiding being injured, and occasionally making something fun happen. That's not to say you need to light it up. The stats don't matter. The goalies are not playing at full capacity. But getting a good impression, especially if you're a fringe guy, that matters. But for teams, your best case here is young guys taking up a lion's share of the minutes, your veterans giving them supporting cast roles, and basically letting the young guys drive the boat. That's not to say the young guys are more important, but they have more to gain from these types of games. There is more for a fringe guy to accomplish. If you're someone like, say, Trent Frederick, who didn't have a great postseason last year, who's coming off a major injury, you come out there, you play a responsible game. You probably be an alternate captain if you're on one of the B or C teams for a group of mostly younger guys. You go out there and you put together some good tape. Okay. You start to convince the public at large. And look, obviously the players don't particularly care the opinion the public holds of them. But if you're Trent Frederick and you want to put forward a good first step towards this contract, which is crazy and really long and kind of expensive, you going out there and having a good preseason, that would go a long way as far as establishing a vibe. If you're Adam Henrique and they're asking you center a second line with prospect A and veteran C, and just be useful, not even be good. Just go out there and give your wingers a chance to do something. If you're Ike Howard or Matthew Savoie, you want a splash play. You want one highlight to take away from this preseason to feel good about, to build some confidence. And that's where the preseason is practical. You can help guys build their confidence. Practice helps build confidence. Game reps help build confidence. Playing well in actual games help build confidence. So, and I know we talk about confidence as this kind of binary, you have it or you don't, or you have some. Building confidence through doing. And it's really important. And I've quoted Tom Brady a few times on this idea over the last few weeks as we start ramping up. But Tom Brady says everybody should play football. Not because football is virtuous, not because football is the best sport. You should play football because it's hard, because it is going to challenge you, because it's going to require you to do things you are uncomfortable with, because you are going to fail. And part of sports, and the reason I think sports are invaluable, especially when it comes to youth sports, I know there's a weird fight going on between the helicopter parent generation and the kids who were raised by said generation, trying to figure out where we go from here as far as youth sports go. But learning how to lose, learning how to answer adversity, that's invaluable as far as life goes. And that's the value of sports, especially at the youth level. You need to understand that life is challenging, that there are going to be days where you are just going to take it on the chin from 9 to 5, and you're going to have to be able to clock out. You're going to go home. If you have a partner, you'll talk to your partner. If you live with your roommates, you'll talk to your roommates more. Maybe you just want to isolate. Maybe you just want to let it simmer, and then you need to find a way to move on. When you harbor resentment, when you hold a grudge, you are allowing it to occupy space. You are allowing it to take away from what you could be doing. And learning that trait, learning how to have resolve, to be resilient, that only comes from loss. That only comes from losing. And that's not just talking about wins and losses in the world of sports. You only learn how valuable certain things are when you don't have it anymore. If you hate your job, but you make decent money and you get laid off, you understand the value of that. If you lose a family member, you lose the value of their companionship, of their love. And understanding that really puts sports in perspective. Yes, I love to win. I love to win. At the same time, I am also 28. I have not played organized team sports since I was in high school. I understand that losing has taught me a whole lot more. And these preseason games, once upon a time, they held a little bit of weight. They were important. But now they are an opportunity for young guys to get an answer, to learn about themselves, to figure themselves out. It's opportunities for fringe NHLers to deserve a chance, to prove they deserve a chance to stay in the show. Because ultimately, the preseason is for the guys who aren't here yet. They are for the guys who want to be here. That's why nobody takes it seriously. The veterans who don't want to be there don't need to. The guys who do, they desperately need to be there. But that will just about do it for this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everyone that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night in the ramp up to the start of the regular season. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.